How do I, 24F, tell my mom, 53F, and dad, 49M, that I took him at my breaking point with living with them over how I took him being treated? Should I try to fix things or move out? I apologize in advance if this is disorganized and lengthy. I am currently experiencing a breakdown and feeling uncertain about how to manage my situation. Summary. My mother has essentially been limiting my autonomy every time I try to act like an adult with my own will because most of my social activities include my partner and late nights with friends. She is accustomed to me having been an isolated hermit for most of my life. She has considered sabotaging my partners and my small trip to renew our driver's licenses and see my extended family on her side while we are there, primarily due to the issue of staying overnight in a hotel with my partner. My father is essentially a stranger residing in the same house, who used to physically and continues to emotionally abuse me. He always perceives me as promiscuous simply for having male friends. He has disowned me multiple times throughout my life for being upset and has threatened to kick me out, particularly if I were ever to become pregnant. My mother seemingly resents or is envious of my partner, which leads to conflicts. She occasionally speaks to me as if I am both foolish and childlike. My mother will not permit me to sever ties with my father because he is family, yet he has always abandoned me whenever it suited him and has not been present for significant events in my life, unless compelled to be there. I find it impossible to have a social life without an argument because it is consistently late at night when I am out of the house. Although my mother has offered to host my friends at our home, she knows my father would never allow it and would react extremely negatively. I desperately wish to move out, but I absolutely cannot afford it, even with a roommate. Context: my mother, 53 years old, and I, 24 years old, have always been very close, akin to two peas in a pod. She has provided unwavering support and love since my birth, and I would do anything for her as she would for me. She has consistently been there for me at every significant event in my life as I was growing up. My relationship with my father, 49 years old, however, is highly strained for various reasons. Primarily, this stems from his upbringing in a traditional Mexican household, where the male figure is dominant and his word is law. Disobedience from the wife and children warrants punishment or violence. My mother has instilled values in me that contradict my father's upbringing, causing us to feel like strangers coexisting under the same roof. I love him because he is my father, but I do not like him due to all the physical and emotional trauma he has inflicted on me, as well as his general disengagement from my life. My dating history has been a series of disasters, and my mother has been a witness to this journey. I have encountered immature partners who refuse to take responsibility, those who have treated me as a rebound, and those who have abused me physically, cheated, or emotionally gaslighted me. Now, onto the story. There isn't a clear starting moment, but I will begin with when I started dating my significant other, who is now 24 years old, a year and a half ago. I met my 23-year-old partner at work nearly 2 years ago, and we immediately connected. We communicated for a while and soon began a relationship. From the onset, I sensed he would be different from my previous relationships. He respects me as an individual and my boundaries, displaying incredible patience and understanding regarding my anxiety and past trauma. He listens and always offers assistance even before I consider asking for it. Frankly, he treats me like the princess I never believed I was. I envision him in my future as my husband, and he has expressed that he feels similarly. I love him immensely. Our backgrounds are quite similar, aside from the extent of freedom we experienced as children, which was minimal for both of us. One significant difference, however, lies in our independence as adults. His mother acknowledges his adulthood and allows him to act freely, provided he doesn't land in serious trouble. There is no curfew. Instead, she requests that he simply check in to assure her that he is safe. Yes, we both still live with our parents. My mother acknowledges my adulthood and advises me to let her know where I am going, who I am with, and when I will return. From the time I turned 18 until I was 22, I had no motivation to exercise that freedom, so I did not. I remained a hermit. However, since I have become comfortable with my current partner and sought to enjoy my freedom as an adult, it has suddenly become an issue for my mother. I have suddenly made numerous friends who invite me to their homes or to bars when I finish work. I typically end my shifts between midnight and 2 a.m. This often results in late nights, usually no later than 3 a.m., which is not significantly different from some nights when I work late. I receive invitations to my partner's holiday plans and family friends' parties, and occasionally stay overnight due to alcohol consumption. The only way I can describe my mother's behavior over the past year is as that of a jealous teenager, and I am utterly confused about how to address this since she has always been such a wise, mature, and strong figure in my life. However, now that I am trying to spread my wings, I feel as though she is nearly suffocating me and attempting to revert me to my previous antisocial self. If I was not in school or at work, I was consistently at home. We have had numerous arguments on this matter, and it feels like we are getting nowhere. The conclusion is generally, "You are my child, I will always worry about you, and you can be angry with me about it. I do not want you to engage in anything foolish, and I especially do not agree with you being out late at night or spending the night with your boyfriend. You are not married, and that is not how I was raised." She will state, "You are an adult, and I cannot control you, but I can and will express my opinions on these matters." The persistent feeling I receive from these discussions is that she refuses to acknowledge that I am no longer the child I once was, and that every expression of adult independence I display is simply viewed as foolishness, reflected in the tone she employs when speaking to me. She has outright called me foolish for making plans for a 2-3 day trip with my partner to 1. Complete a necessary adult obligation to remain a functional member of society, renewing our driver's licenses. 2. Visit my extended family on my mother's side. And 3. Simply relax, enjoy myself, and escape the recent stresses of my home and work life. I wanted to transform an activity everyone despises into something enjoyable. Just before I left for our small trip, she handed me a crucial document I needed for my appointment for the visit, saying, "Here is this, you'll need it for the appointment," although I sensed she was considering withholding it. Me. "Oh, okay, thanks, but why were you considering not giving me this?" Mom. "Honestly, I believe that stupidity should have consequences. However, I would rather you succeed at your appointment than punish you for your foolishness." She contemplated deliberately sabotaging my appointment to illustrate that I was making foolish decisions, namely, spending nights with my partner 3 hours away from home, irrespective of the fact that I was doing what I needed to do as an adult and facilitating his engagement with extended family, which aligns with her wishes. To my contentment, the DMV never requested to see this document my mother had contemplated withholding from me, so it would not have been a sabotage from the outset. On another occasion, I confided in my mother via text about my boyfriend's recent ordeal in which he had a minor collision with a semi-truck and became trapped between the truck and a wall. He is fine. And thankfully, the car is in good condition given the circumstances. My mother's initial reaction was, "Me. He's okay, but he was vague about details since he was pretty shaken up." Mom. "And yet he always wants to be the one driving on trips." Me. "Mom, how on earth is that his fault?" Despite the fact that he maintained a safe distance from the semi, allowed the car ahead of him to pass, and then accelerated to pass the semi. Mom. "You know, I wish you would defend me the way you defend him against me. I never said it was his fault." Me. "That last text came across as implying that. I feel like you are often unfair towards him, especially regarding family visits. When have I ever failed to defend you?" Mom. "Then just ignore me. Half of his decisions impact my daughter, so you can forget I shouldn't speak up. You always side with him regardless of what I say." There are more instances, but these are among the most significant. I am utterly exhausted. I cannot comprehend why she is responding so negatively towards me lately, and I am uncertain how to manage it. I cannot even count the number of emotional breakdowns I have experienced concerning this situation with my mother because I am terrified of disappointing her. And recently that is all I feel I have done due to her reactions. The thought of letting my mother down is unbearable, but it seems that everything I attempt in my life is deemed insufficient, and I am left feeling inadequate. Now, where does my father fit into all this? Nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. I grew weary of fearing my father's anger during high school, which led me to argue back. This only resulted in further physical abuse and me crying myself to sleep after locking myself away in my room. One instance was so severe that I can only partially recall it. I don't remember my mother arriving home and knocking my father unconscious with a 2x4 after I called her at work. Consequently, the ongoing emotional and physical abuse quickly diminished my desire to maintain a relationship with him. Our good days consist of coming home, attending to our own lives, and avoiding interaction. Our bad days entail shouting, threats, and my father disowning me while demanding I leave his house. As a woman, I am inherently viewed as promiscuous and closeted, and I must be engaging in sexual acts with my boyfriend or any male friends I have. He despises my friends coming over because he dislikes anyone, which has caused enough tension that the last time I had a group of friends over was 6 years ago. I can barely invite my partner or best friend over without inciting his discontent. Now that I am seriously dating someone, he automatically assumes that when I spend the night away, it means I am likely to become pregnant by my partner. He has explicitly stated that I would not be welcomed back into his house if that were the case. My mother would never permit me to be forced out, as she shoulders 80 of the bills. Both my mother and I continually walk on eggshells to maintain peace, ensuring silence when he is asleep, limiting any loud talking, often keeping my cats confined to my room to avoid his dogs, and doing chores during his sporadic moments of laundry or cooking. To sum it up, I have given up on attempting to foster a relationship with my father because he will not invest the time or effort into it. He believes I ought to be submissive, and everything will be fine. He seems disappointed in me for exercising my free will as a human being, and he appears embarrassed by me because I am not overtly feminine or proficient in Spanish. I have informed my mother that I do not wish to pursue a relationship with him, which has sparked further conflicts between us. Mom, you cannot do that. He is your dad. You don't abandon family. Me. He is my dad, and I love him solely for being my dad. However, I do not like him in any capacity. He has forsaken me numerous times when it suited him, abused me physically and verbally, and I am exhausted. I am done trying. Mom, I understand everything he has done to me. He has done worse to you, but you have chosen to accept this life with him. That is your decision, but I did not make this choice. Why must I be obligated to share this relationship with you when the other party exhibits no interest in making an effort other than berating me constantly? I did not choose this for myself. Why are you compelling me? Mom, it is because he is your family, and you simply do not relinquish family like that. He is your dad, and he is the only one you will ever have. I honestly believe the reason my mother is insistent that I maintain a relationship with my father stems from the sudden loss of her own father when she was 17. I believe she fears that I would harbor regret if my father were to pass away soon, which is plausible given his deteriorating health. Ultimately, I am utterly at a loss with both of my parents. I am terrified of being perceived as a disappointment, and I have felt that way for years, an emotion that only intensifies. I aspire to spread my wings and soar, but my mother seems to aim to clip my wings at every opportunity, compounded by the fact that I could never financially sustain living independently. I am desperate to escape, yet I see no solution available. If you made it through to the end, thank you, and I apologize for the lengthy post. Story 2. I am an 18-year-old considering cutting contact with my parents, 46F, 47M, unless they stop arguing all the time. Help. I, an 18-year-old female, currently reside with my parents, aged 46 and 47, as well as my 2 younger brothers, both 12 years old. As I write this on my mobile device at 4 in the morning, I apologize for any errors I may make. I will start from what is essentially the beginning, although the issues between me and my parents have been ongoing for years, so some details may be unclear due to my poor memory. I previously posted this on another subreddit, but I feel I need more guidance than simply being reassured that my feelings are justified. This is going to be an extensive post, and I apologize in advance. Essentially, when I was around 15 or 16, my father had an affair with my mother's best friend for reasons unknown to me. When my mother discovered this one night, she erupted in anger, throwing plates and shattering my father's phone, among other violent actions. My family dynamics are somewhat hazy in my memory, as I tend to block out difficult experiences, yet I recall that night vividly. While my mother was screaming and lashing out at my father in the kitchen, I was in my room with my younger brothers, blasting the television to distract them from the shouting. I felt the need to call my older sibling for support, and for several days, I lived in fear that my parents would divorce. That incident profoundly affected me. I began therapy soon after, where my counselor suggested that I might have some form of complex post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from that experience. Since that night, I have struggled significantly with my parents' arguments. In therapy, I expressed my wish for them to conduct their disputes outside or in areas where my brothers and I could not overhear. They did not appreciate my request, but agreed to it nonetheless. For several months, perhaps even a year, the time frame is unclear, things seemed to improve. My parents attended couples counseling and individual therapy, and the situation appeared to be on the mend. However, my father had another affair. I am less certain about the specifics of this incident, but there was still a lot of yelling and shouting, and my mother was hurling items around, mirroring the chaos of the first incident, except I was not responsible for watching my brothers. This setback effectively reset my progress in therapy, although my parents did not end up divorcing, as I had expected. Additionally, there were numerous stressful events occurring at home, such as one of my brothers running away to stay permanently with his father, a very long story, and my older sibling making several poor decisions. This was when my resentment towards my parents began to take root. The pattern of explosive arguments ensued, during which they discussed divorce or expressed exhaustion with one another, only to ultimately remain together. This cycle deeply affected me, and there were many instances where I found myself consoling my brothers instead of focusing on my own well-being, as I was more concerned about them. Fast forward to July of last year. The year 2034 was particularly difficult for me, as I had just experienced a falling out with a close friend 2 months prior. Just days before my 18th birthday, my parents had another massive argument. I wanted to bake my own cake for my birthday, as I enjoy baking and had a particular vision for it, so I asked my father to take me to the store for the necessary ingredients. Throughout the trip, he sulked and complained, remarking on how obvious their issues were. I replied honestly, rating the situation a 7, although it would likely have been a 10, and he suggested he was uncertain about how long they could stay together, continuously hinting that a separation was imminent. On both the day before and the day of my birthday, I was preoccupied with worry about whether my parents would divorce and what that would mean for our family rather than focusing on turning 18. A month later, most of our city experienced power outages due to a severe storm with strong winds. My brothers went to stay at my older sibling's house, which is just 20 minutes away and has power. I chose to remain at home, thinking the electricity might be restored by morning. It was extremely hot inside as we had no air conditioning, so I decided to sleep in my brother's room in the basement, where it was cooler. That night, my parents began arguing again. It escalated significantly, and after months of this behavior, I was utterly exhausted. My parents, particularly my father, stirred me up every time they fought, saying things like, "I don't know if I can keep her this time," or other guilt-inducing statements aimed at eliciting sympathy from me. I had reached my breaking point and sent them both a lengthy message in a group chat I created, explaining that their arguments were immature and had negatively impacted my life. I expressed my frustration about constantly hearing their shouting and emphasized that I no longer wanted to discuss their relationship, a boundary I maintained thereafter. They did not respond or come down to talk to me, but they did stop arguing. The following morning, I called my older sibling, asking if I could stay with them since I did not want to speak to my parents and our power was still out. Midway through the call, I could hear shouting, glass breaking, and yelling coming from the kitchen upstairs. I was terrified. The noise sounded extremely violent, and due to my mother's history of physical aggression during their fights, I genuinely feared for my father's safety. Overwhelmed with fear, I hung up on my sibling and called the police from the basement, explaining that I thought my parents might be injured. My sibling immediately became alarmed upon hearing my panic, and they rushed over. While I was on the phone with the police, my parents had mostly ceased their fighting. My father came downstairs for an unknown reason, and he was covered in blood. It appeared as though his neck was severely injured, and his shirt was soaked. I was frightened. He asked whom I was calling, and I informed him it was the police. He mouthed the word good at me. At that point, I believe my mother was cleaning up the mess in the kitchen. By the time the police arrived, they had both tidied up, which infuriated me because I realized the authorities would downplay the seriousness of the situation. They separated my parents, ensured I was safe, and then left while I packed my belongings for when my older sibling arrived. As I was gathering my things, my mother entered and asked if I was happy. I think I simply replied, "That was not okay," at which point she exited the room. When my older sibling arrived, they called the police again for reasons I don't entirely understand. My older sibling tends to be dramatic, and I question whether calling the police was necessary, but it happened anyway. Much of this particular incident is a blur. I remember crying a lot and feeling terrified that this was going to be the argument that led to a divorce. Once the power was restored at our home, I returned. I recall not speaking to my parents for several days. I was very upset. Child Protective Services visited in the following days, and I vividly remember fabricating a story, claiming that my parents didn't argue much. This experience was profoundly traumatic for me, and I continue to suffer from nightmares and harbor a great deal of resentment regarding how everyone managed the situation. This is becoming rather lengthy, so I will summarize by saying that these incidents are just a few examples from a span of 6 or 7 years. My parents, particularly my father, have been mentally abusive and, at times, physically abusive toward me. While they do treat me better now, their ongoing arguments inflict significant mental turmoil upon me. Fast forward to the present. It is currently 5:30 in the morning as I write this, and the events that prompted this post occurred an hour ago. I awoke to more screaming and shouting. My parents now occupy the second floor above me, and I could hear everything. They were not attempting to keep their voices down. Frustrated and tired from being abruptly awakened, I yelled from the bottom of the stairs for them to be quiet, expressing my exhaustion and desire to sleep. They quieted down for a few moments, but the noise resumed until my mother left the house. My father then entered my room with a cut on his brow and blood on his chest. He merely apologized for my having to hear the commotion, and I stared at him in silence. A few minutes later, he returned to discuss how he was finished with my mother. I interrupted him, stating that I was done and did not want to hear about their relationship anymore, insisting that he leave my room. After several requests, he finally exited. I am just extremely tired of this. They are fully grown adults, yet they behave like children whenever they argue. I should not be the one telling them to be quiet every time they start yelling, yet I feel I am the only one who can intervene to protect my brothers from the chaos. I am utterly exhausted by their immature behavior and by their lack of respect for everyone else in this household. Their arguments are unhealthy, and they serve no purpose here, particularly given the fact that they apparently cannot fight without resorting to physical violence. My concern is that I no longer want to communicate with them until I see a significant change in their behavior. Realistically, I understand that I may need to engage with them if I continue living here. I am attempting to move out, but rent is expensive, and I have a low-paying job, yet I am incredibly fed up with them. They feel more like troublesome roommates than parents. I genuinely dislike them as individuals, and I believe I would be better off if I said nothing to them and stopped spending time with them. Both of them are deeply flawed people, and everything I have shared is just the tip of the iceberg regarding all the troubling behaviors they have exhibited. I want to stop all communication with them until I can observe a meaningful transformation in their actions. I sometimes transport my brothers to and from school and see my parents nearly every day. What I seek is advice on how to navigate this situation, or whether I should even pursue this course of action. I am feeling quite lost and frustrated. To summarize, I want to halt communication with my parents unless I witness a considerable change in their behavior, but I don't know how to proceed. Story 3. Wibta for dropping my friend after he called me lazy and said I took him not trying hard enough. I recently engaged in a disagreement with my friend. It began during what seemed like a typical conversation when I casually mentioned my asexuality. This revelation was relatively new to me, so he was unaware until I brought it up. Later that day, while texting, he inquired, "You mentioned being asexual. When did that happen?" Initially, I did not respond because I was preoccupied spending time with my brother. I hesitated to answer because I wanted to avoid any misinterpretations, so I replied, "I don't want to answer." For context, I had previously asked him out, but he declined. I believed we had concluded that on amicable terms, allowing us to remain friends. After I sent my message, he immediately assumed that my statement pertained to him and that he was the reason I identified as asexual. He commented, "Is this because of what happened between us? I don't want you to give up," which left me baffled since I never mentioned wanting to stop dating. I clarified, "It's not about you," but he insisted that I should not give up. His repeated assertions regarding my supposed resignation confused me further, prompting me to ask why he thought this. He responded, "You said you want a relationship, and after I suggested we remain friends, it seemed like you gave up. Am I mistaken?" I told him he was incorrect, explaining that my realization about being asexual was not influenced by him, but rather came through my own research and discussions with another friend who identifies as asexual. It was something I had been pondering for a while, not just following our interaction. I reiterated my desire for a relationship despite being asexual. He responded, "That makes no sense," arguing that I was trying to label something that should not be labeled. I countered by stating, "Not all relationships are sexually based." He then asserted that, from his perspective, it seemed as though I was pretending. He argued that because I made sexual jokes and innuendos, I could not be asexual. At that point, feeling depleted, I ended the conversation, stating that I didn't want to talk at that moment and would reach out later. The next day, he apologized for arguing with me about my identity, but I remained upset and chose not to respond. Not being adept at reading social cues or engaging in social interactions, undiagnosed ODHD, I found myself confused. My friend, who is quite protective, became furious after I vented to her and shared the messages. With my consent, she began messaging him, saying, "What don't you understand about her being asexual and still wanting a relationship? Aromantic asexual and asexual are not the same. Not all relationships are sexual. Just because she makes sexual jokes does not imply she desires it. They are simply jokes. She did not become asexual because you rejected her. She recognized her identity after our conversation about my sexuality, as she realizes she feels the same. Not everything revolves around you." Following this, we exchanged a few more words, and he expressed confusion over my lack of response to his questions. He accused me of labeling myself and suggested I should mature because I was not communicating effectively as an almost adult. It's important to note that he knows about my neurodivergence. He then called me lazy for not wanting to learn. Although I recognize I am not the greatest communicator, I have previously expressed to him my aversion to being labeled as lazy, stemming from the trauma of neurodivergent masking, explaining that I struggle and find it challenging. Subsequently, he suggested I seek therapy rather than bottle up my feelings. I have informed him before that therapy is inaccessible for me due to high costs, and my parents do not believe I require it. I have since stopped asking them. I clarified that I could not pursue therapy. He responded, "Just wait until you're 18, as if that hadn't always been my goal. I attempted to remain civil and not let my emotions dictate my responses since we usually maintained a friendly relationship. He offered a therapist recommendation, which I declined, asking him, "Can you please drop this?" as my irritation was resurfacing. However, he did not honor his promise to stop. He insisted that I could always vent to him, which annoyed me since, whenever I do so, he tries to solve my problems when I primarily need someone to listen. I explained, "Some days I just want to vent. While I appreciate your willingness to help on those days, you often give me suggestions I have already considered, have been told, or that are simply not possible for me, which frustrates me." He retorted, "That's just life. People will repeat the same advice over and over, and you need to deal with it. If you can't manage that, I don't know what to say." Then he had the audacity to claim I could always vent to him. He next contradicted himself by stating, "If you acknowledge that you need help but refuse to seek it from the individuals you trust, then you're either lazy or have simply given up." I told him once more not to label me as lazy, to which he responded, "Okay, I will. But why do you dislike being called that?" Frustrated, I replied, "I can't converse right now, I am upset with you," and he responded, "You should be angrier with yourself for not trying. I know you can change, you just don't want to because you dislike change. However, I'll step back and let you cool off." I found his remarks insensitive, and although I aimed to calm down and avoid saying anything I might regret, he was conscious of my mental struggles, and I had shared these with him previously. For him to express, this felt disconnected from reality, as if he believed everyone experienced life the same way he does. Although he claimed he would let me cool off, he continued texting, saying, "By the way, do you believe the therapist won't give you the same advice I am? You require assistance, and you know that. You're merely too lazy to ask for it because of your fear of change. Now I will let you cool off so you're ready to have a mature discussion." I shared this situation with the friend I mentioned earlier, and she advised me to block him due to his insensitivity and disrespect towards me. She also asked whether I genuinely wanted to maintain our friendship. I am uncertain about blocking him because this was his first episode of such behavior. However, if this reflects his true character, I may not wish to remain in contact with him. So, would I be the antagonist for blocking him after all he said to me?